What can I say that's possibly different on the, being that we're so hyper-focused on purpose in life, as Carol was saying. And so this is, if I do not mention your name, my apologies, but you influenced the refinement of this talk at 3 o'clock in the morning last night. Because that's about when I got home, that's when I got home from Berkeley last night, because the Uber ride is about an hour and a half from here to get to Berkeley. So let me say that the science that's been presented has been amazing and stimulating, and I'm already have reached my threshold in terms of I've got everything and more that I could have ever asked for from this conference. So what I want to do is change the direction completely. Take a step backwards and focus on 3 things, which is theory, measurement, and then how do we import this into the real world, which is really messy. You can read my articles. I give them away freely all the time on my websites, blogs. So I'm going to present a tiny smidgen, one tiny study, and the only reason I'm going to present data at all is because I want to say that the way that it's published, I'm now reinterpreting it differently, and we're doing different things than what it looks like in the literature. So we're actually ripping apart our own work. What I do want to say ahead of time is some of your work is going to be challenged in this presentation. What I asked, and my work as well in the past, my interest is very clear, is to do the best science possible to make the greatest impact possible with this work of educating the public and improving welfare. So I'm going to ask you to put your egos aside as you hear this talk. I did not get to do the part of the workshop yesterday, which was great, which was if you could write one tweet, what would it be? So I gave a workshop to the government intelligence. I'm not allowed to mention their name, but you could probably guess who it is, with people that are moving to senior management. And then one person asked at the end if you could, which was not the question I was expecting, if you could write one tweet that would capture everything that you would want to influence in the government intelligence, what would it be? And I said, off the fly, when challenged, choose curiosity over criticality. And so that's what I'm going to ask you here. I think there's not been enough conversation at our conference so far, so I am going to take the risk of letting you guys interrupt me and ask questions during this talk so we can have conversation. I'm going to moderate myself because I can already imagine Anthony's half panic attack right now of trying to modulate this thing. So I might cut them early. I just want to see kind of, because I'm inviting a couple of ideas that challenge the way we've been doing research so far. I have more questions than answers. I've got a ton of free research ideas I'm giving away for free, and testable hypotheses for us to explore in the future. Sound good? Yeah. Okay. Not different choice because we're stuck here. There's no other talk at the same time. Okay. So let me just kind of give you an idea, kind of the overview of what I want to do. What is I want to provide a conceptual model of how purpose in life. Bill, am I in your way, by the way?
Yeah, but I'm about to move for that reason.
Oh, is that?
So
I just stand behind the podium.
Yeah, no, I don't want to have you get disrupted, so I'm gonna find that.
Oh, I am. We teach undergrads. Like no one can interrupt me. It was an adult, like whatsoever. So I'm going to provide a conceptual model about how purpose in life, to me, I'm going to use the word we because I have lots of collaborators and people, so I'll rarely use the word I. So don't think I have multiple personalities. A conceptual model of how purpose in life fits into the larger literature. I'm going to be discussing what we've done measurement-wise, some new ideas, what we're experimenting in my lab, the amazing stuff that I just heard yesterday, which has kind of blown my mind of what's not been published, which is very different than what's happening right now. And lots of ideas, experiments. So if you, again, choose criticality, you can tear them to pieces or view it as a Lego block set. I've got the farm edition, you have the space edition, and together we mix them together and we can have this amazing, bizarre thing that only a 7-year-old kid could appreciate. That's the way that I view kind of conversations in science. And finally, what I want to do is offer some really critical, testable hypotheses that potentially we should be exploring, and just a few of them. I actually have hundreds of them we've kind of designed in my laboratory. And that's it. So, I'm big on parsimony. For me, purpose, very central, very simple. Central, self-organizing life aim. Simple, it's catchy. I give talks to organizations all the time, everything from schools to Customs and Border Protection. They get it. Central, the idea of like if you're an archer, I am just starting this out as myself. I'm having a midlife crisis and doing all sorts of weird things like surfing and archery. I'm not good at any of these things. It's like the bullseye. If you do not know someone's purpose, you do not know their sense of identity. To me, it's a central core aspect. And I know that Patrick has a measure, which I have not read yet, but I'm dying for him to send me the PDF after this conference. Self-organizing, that if you have a purpose, and we'll dive deep into that over the course of the next 15 minutes, this basically provides a framework for how to direct your finite resources, your time, your energy, your attention, your finances into behaviors and goals. And then a life aim in that essentially this is a self-sustaining source of figuring out what to do with your life. And in a second, I'll differentiate between goals and purpose, which I think is a big mishap that we have like in the literature right now for doing these things. Simple definition, obviously huge overlap with Bill Damon. One of the great things of this conference is how much we converge, but actually that also worries me as well, because it means of, well, what are we going to do this as a launching pad for the next stage of purpose in life research? So I will purposely look for divergences, but no, I'll kind of make a recognition of how much convergence there is. So what I've done is I've taken my work and formed it into a single figure. Feel free to, I can send you the slides. You can use it kind of if you ever teach a class on purpose in life and if anything interests you. This conceptual model is not designed to inform measurement directly. I'll get to that in the second part of this talk. This is about how can we create a parsimonious explanation of the underlying processes to help influence health and well-being. And for me, purpose in life provides a real parsimonious explanation, but I want to explain this in the concept of how this fits into the thousands of constructs in psychology and behavioral economics and sociology and public health. Why are we choosing purpose in life for this conference, knowing that, as Carol said, almost everyone here, just looking at your CVs, you study things other than purpose in life as well. So I want to kind of merge these worlds together a little bit. So what I want to do is walk you through this conceptual model. And just like Jaeger, I do not like to spend all my time creating the perfect figures, so this is a nice, simple illustration. I do not care about aesthetics at this point. So this first path is the notion of you have all these motivational models of why we do the things we do. And they've come up periodically over the course of this workshop. So we have Anne, who's obsessed with terror management theory, where her mortality is being primed on a regular basis. So that's a fundamental as motivational model. If Richard wants to bust out a paper from 1959 to show that he's smarter than me, we can put out White's research on effective motivation.
I'm just older.
Yeah.
I stopped reading in 1960.
Yeah. But still necessary to bring up a bibliography, though, that's in your brain. So we've got David McClelland, we've got lots of motivational models. And the idea of, for us, purpose in life is not essential to live a happy, fulfilling, and long life. It's one pathway of getting there. And the notion that if you don't have a purpose in life just might mean that you're not as cognitively engaged. And I'm using basically the term that Bill, Matt, Ann, and Heather used yesterday, which is that you're not actively, with great intention, planning your goals and your next move as you walk through and navigate the shoals of everyday life. And so if you don't have a purpose, you probably just have a slight uptick in the chance that you're going to have untoward outcomes such as poor mental health, poor physical health, and a shorter life expectancy. And if you really dive into the data as a skeptic, not as a cynic, but as a skeptic, what you realize our effect sizes are small, the error bars are big, and what that suggests is that purpose is not the path to having longevity, physical health, and mental health. The second one is about how purpose relates to goals. And the idea is, and there's a big social psychological literature about motivations and needs. And what we find is that you've got self-determination theory, which is basically talking with DC and Ryan, talking about these basic fundamental needs that we are all kind of primed to kind of try to satisfy on a daily basis. The sense of autonomy, the sense of competence, the sense of belonging. Jaeger was just talking about autonomy kind of, and in there was competence and belonging as well, if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, just didn't use the terms. You've got Stephen Reese has this really underappreciated theory of 16 basic psychological needs, the idea that the end states that we pursue, there's individual differences in which ones push us and pull us the most about this. And all of these has helped us find inroads into why do we do the things we do, but underneath there, to me, there's this latent underlying process that remains elusive. And for a large number of people, for me, it appears to be purpose in life. It can help you understand how to become more attuned to your cardinal interests, your core values, your goals. Essentially, if you have a purpose in life, it should stimulate awareness of goals and why and where you should pursue them in the course of your life. But purpose is not synonymous with goals. And so I just started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu about 2.5 weeks ago. I should probably say that I'm 42 years old. You should not start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at 42 years old. You cannot do a cartwheel out of bed in the morning. You have to actually do a couple of back stretching exercises.
So that's the problem with this midlife crisis idea. I'll talk to you about.
Oh yeah, no, my wife is not happy about anything that I'm describing right now. But there's no materialism, so I'm not driving around in a Ferrari. I can't afford one anyway. So there are just these ways to hurt myself, so I put more load on her whatsoever. So as I'm in this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu studio, what you see is really interesting when you ask people, hey, why are you doing this? Some people say it's to be physically healthier. Some people say it's a lot of the women that are in the class say it's because I want to feel safe walking the street, just walk around with that gravatas. A lot of men will say, well, they're not saying this, but here's what I'm reading as a psychologist, which is that I want to be more masculine. I want to be stronger, more powerful, more dominant. And then you have other people that say something to the effect of, I want to be able to protect my family in case at any point in time that I need to. Now for me, the last one, and even when I heard that guy speak that, I hear the purpose, right? It's not just because, actually, also don't agree, as several other people as well, that self-transcendence is a requirement for a purpose in life. But for this one, when I heard that, I was like, okay, this is an underlying higher order factor that explains why you do the things you do. And it also, and here's the key thing about goals and purpose, that you could swap out jiu-jitsu. It's not about jiu-jitsu. Maybe one person's buying a gun. Maybe some people are moving to a different neighborhood that's safer. Maybe people are having more people live nearby, connecting more with their neighbors. So you have the social connectedness that's in Riff's kind of larger psychological well-being model. The different ways that you can work towards that purpose, they are not tied to specific goals. There's a level bit of flexibility in terms of if you know what your purpose is, there's the ability to recognize that some goals and behaviors are not working for you, for that larger purpose. And you're not wed to any particular pathway to make progress and effort towards that purpose. So in some ways for me, reasonable goals are going to have a terminal endpoint and provide a temporal understanding of a person, whereas a purpose is, to me, the highest level of analysis of understanding the totality of a person and across time and context in general. But I'll actually come back and move away from that statement a little bit. But to understand the totality of a person, if for someone that has a purpose in life and you're not aware of it, you do not know what makes that person tick. And one person's goals are rarely another person's purpose. So there's some evidence to support this model. If you look at, there's a behavioral congruence model by D.S. Moskowitz, which basically is when you engage in goals that are congruent with your dominant personality traits. So if you're highly agreeable and you engage in kind behaviors, if you're highly dominant and you get into quarrelsome academic conversations, whether it's online or in person, is that you experience your goals are primed, you make more effort towards them, you make more progress towards them, and you enjoy the path of the journey of working towards your goals. And then you have the self-concordance model by Ken Sheldon and Kasser and Elliott, which is basically essentially is when you engage in goals that are aligned with your core values, you would make it's easier to make effort, to make progress, and you derive more joy, more meaning, and more physical health from them. But again, underlying that would be values is one thing, that's the abstract principles, and a purpose would be that basically is tied to those values but is not identical with values. So that's the second pathway of this conceptual model. And the third pathway is that if you have a purpose in life, it should stimulate some level of consistency of if I was to observe your behavior from day to day, from moment to moment in your everyday life. And so if you think about this, for me the exemplar of this is Gandhi, is when, there's that famous story where a mother came to Gandhi with a kind of morbidly obese kid and said, listen, I can't get my kid to stop eating sugar, and he says, I come back in 2 weeks. Okay, so again, can you give me some advice? I can't get my kid to stop eating sugar. He's come back in 2 weeks. And she just came back to Gandhi and kind of gave him as much friction as you can in a patriarchal society at the time, which was, dude, like, can you give me some advice? And he's like, I wanted to make sure that I stopped eating sugar so I can kind of, from my own perspective, so I wasn't a hypocrite to give advice for doing this. For Gandhi, there were no days off from his purpose, which was to help people reach their fulfillment, on top of a couple other really major goals. But for his purpose was helping people find some level of higher level fulfillment with their capacities and potentials for doing this. Now, he would work hard, the behavioral consistency, to intentionally not engage in hypocrisy. It's a really hard thing to do, but that's the behavioral consistency. That in some ways, you should often see that a vocation is similar to someone's avocation if they have a purpose in life. If it's broad in scope and large in strength for their purpose in life that happens there. And what also happens is that environmental conditions are often difficult, and you have people and events that get in the way of you making effort and progress towards your purpose. And that's this negligible path 4, which is, if we want to have any realistic model of health and well-being, you have to take account person-environment interactions. And in some way, if people have a purpose in life, they are more likely to be psychologically flexible, so that they can pursue what they care about most despite the presence of pain and obstacles. Find alternative means, find allies that you can kind of recruit for the mission that you're doing, and then figure out, is there alternative routes or alternative goals that I can pursue because this one appears to be obstructed. So in some ways, that negligible path 4 is that in the presence of environmental barriers, whether that's social or more ecological, that people with a purpose would be more resilient. And in some ways, you saw Patrick kind of reveal some data that kind of provides some small bits of evidence to support this, which is less reactivity to stress in daily life. But this model offers a little bit more of like the person-environment interactions, diathesis stress models that you can kind of play with to figure out what do people with purpose look like in everyday life compared to people that have lots of goals and then they don't have a purpose in the slightest. So the 5th and 6th pathway is essentially that while people with purpose might be more psychologically flexible, they might be more resilient, if their purpose is obstructed in a very objective way, that they are going to experience more stress than someone without purpose. Now again, this is a hypothesis, a testable hypothesis. So think about people who their fundamental purpose in life in some way, just as Vic mentioned yesterday, right, to be kind of a caring, engaged husband and father, and you're incarcerated. Well, that's a challenge because there's only a certain number of visitations that you can have there. That's going to be a little bit challenging. Now, you can have some level of psychological flexibility in terms of the numbers of letters that you write, but the opportunities for you to be engaged and involved become minimized quite substantially very quickly. And this is one of the big problems in kind of inner city, because I live in DC, this is a big problem in inner city DC, where you have so many black fathers that have been incarcerated, that basically they have a lot of them have a purpose for kind of to be engaged, compassionate, involved, teaching their kids new things, but they have proxies that are doing it for them. And so in some ways, that's the flexibility, is can you get a proxy to take your role for you and have the foresight to think about that? That would be kind of path 3 that you're looking at here. But while you might be flexible, you're experiencing more stress. If the environmental conditions prevent you from acting in ways congruent with your purpose, you might be able to be consistent with your behavior, but you don't get the physical and psychological health benefits. Right? So this is where I was saying of a lot of the research is good with good, but I think sometimes you have to really kind of think in the real world when you think about actual people in context. If you're unable to be near your kids and it's you think part of your purpose and however you describe it is something about caring for your kids, some way of like teaching your kids to be good, moral, upstanding citizens, and it's blocked in some capacity, you might have the flexibility to find other ways to provide the support, emotional, physical, and educational support, but your stress level is probably going to be through the roof compared to someone that's just, well, my kid's just one part of my life. It's important to me, but it's not my purpose in life. And we're going to dive deeper into this in a little bit. Does that make sense? Right? So it's the idea that the outcomes diverge. based on the environmental conditions that impinge on a person's life. And again, just a conceptual model. I don't have the data yet, but I think this is kind of the way that we should be going to really explore this. My favorite pathway is pathway 7, because when I first got into the literature on purpose, and I should probably say I was a senior in college when I read Carroll's Current Directions in Psych Science article. I was thinking about this yesterday, my hour-and-a-half Uber ride, of like, what was the origin of my interest in purpose? I was in a doctor's office, and they had a Psych Today article on flow. And I was just kind of reading it, and this is when I was working on Wall Street, on the New York Stock Exchange floor. And I was reading this article, and I'm like, oh, this is what I should be doing, kind of playing with this stuff. And this was in 1996. And then in the article was a reference to the Current Directions article, and I kind of went to the library near my house, and I read that. I was like, oh, no, this is what I should be going into for doing this. And then just hung out in the back burner, kind of incubating for a little while, and then like 6 years later, I got into grad school, and everything else worked out, sort of. So when I was reading that literature on purpose in life the first time, everything was religiosity. Religiosity meaning a purpose. And there's a huge literature, which really nice in the past 5 years we've broadened out. Of like, this is not the lone path to getting to purpose in life. It's an interesting literature. Really robust findings, 2002, nice meta-analysis, really nice effect sizes. But this always bothered me of the simplicity of, if you're religious, you have profound meaning and purpose in life. And so for me, this is the pathway where it's bidirectional. Purpose can influence and be influenced by religiosity depending on the timing in a person's life. I am not a developmentalist. Yeah, it's a made-up term that I'd never heard before, right? When psychologists don't speak to the public enough, they make up these terms. So for me, this is conceptual model, is that while there's a heritable component to religiosity, argue outside of this how you feel about that, when you think about the development of religion, religious convictions in children, it's normally role modeling and nurturing. Even though there's obviously particular personalities and biological systems that influence the way that it triggers and holds your interest. But in the beginning, it's pretty much going to be from parents' role modeling. So in some ways, religiosity could lead to a purpose if it's internalized in some way. And so in the beginning, religiosity ends up having like potentially a causal arrow towards purpose. But once a purpose is generated, that a purpose believes that in some sorts, and this was in the measure by Bill and Heather and Ann and Matt, one of your items of the purposes you could choose is like serving God in some capacity. If that, or however other variant that religion is formed a purpose in your life, when that happens, the causal arrow flips, and the primary driver is the sense that you have a purpose in life that organizes the goals, decision-making, and behavior as you navigate through everyday life that happens there. And for me, this conceptual model helps explain some of Mike Steger's work, who's a big collaborator of mine, where the indirect relationship that religion is related to well-being and health, it's mediated by a sense of purpose in life. But that would be different if you caught someone at an earlier phase of life when they're still generating of, is this something that's true to my identity? Have I differentiated myself from my parents or caregivers that have influenced me? Again, testable hypotheses, conceptual model.
Todd, can I ask quickly?
Oh, yeah.
Are you intentionally using the word religiosity instead of spirituality?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can go back to that. I was just curious.
Yeah. I have a paper on spirituality with John Neslick about this, and one of the things is, to me, spirituality is a little bit one of those wastebasket terms now. It's kind of where sort of everything's stuffing everything in there that's transcendent, self-transcendent, that doesn't involve religion, so it's kind of a hard term to break down. Religion kind of, I feel like, can get a little bit more scientific, precise about it. And in some ways, these pathways offer us an understanding of kind of how we get to purpose of physical health and mental health, which we've been talking over the past couple of days, are what are the mechanisms of getting of there. And so, not in this drawing right here, but you can think of multiple pathways. How do you get to physical and mental health? Well, one way is through your ability to be psychologically flexible such that you can pursue what you care about most despite the presence of pain and obstacles, right? So in some ways, that ability to resist and persist despite the presence of stressors or internal dialogue of your thoughts, feelings, memories, and sensations
That's one pathway. So that's kind of the mechanism. Another pathway is this cognitive engagement piece, which is in kind of the model that was talked about yesterday, which is the ability to plan and have foresight and insight into how am I going to construct my life in a way such that I extract more pleasure and meaning and social connections and all the other dimensions of Carol's model from my everyday interactions that happen there. That's a potential pathway to happen there. The other one's just a direct pathway. By that direct pathway, just directly to physical and mental health, get to neurobiological mechanisms, which is outside of my level of analysis territory that happens there. The most controversial kind of direction they have, although as happened here, Bill Damon kind of mentioned the same sort of thing, and then Patrick kind of finally provides some empirical evidence to kind of it started moving in that direction, is that not everyone has potentially the capacity to form a purpose. And this is a controversial statement, but I think to thinking about this is, if you've ever worked, so I've worked in 3 VA hospitals. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've worked with people that are clinically depressed. I've worked with people that have committed suicide. You name the disorders, substance use disorders, eating disorders, body dysmorphic disorders that happen there. Certain mental illnesses are so impairing, you are unable to have the abstract cognitive processing that allows you to go beyond simple everyday goals to a higher order construct to figure out what is my life about. And I know that, Caitlin, we were talking about this yesterday, which is one of the problems in clinical psychology right now, which is only slightly being ameliorated, is if you come into my office, well, not anymore, because now I got tired of seeing clients realizing the impact, they're a better therapist than myself, let's say it that way, is that when I would treat clients back in the day, and you had obsessive compulsive disorder, and you had 6 hours of rituals to clean your house, put on gloves, spray aerosol on your car, put newspapers out from your bedroom to the bathroom to the front door, so that you, even though oddly that the newspaper would make you so dirty, even more so than actually whatever was on your carpet, but it was a 6-hour ritual, response, exposure, prevention, treated in 3.5 months. What we would do is we'd shake their hand and say, hey, listen, congratulations. You no longer meet this arbitrary thing that DSM has created called OCD. You now have 8 hours free per day. You've been suffering for 20 years, so good luck with the rest of your life and figuring out what to do with those 8 hours per day. But that's awesome. You have all this free time now. It's great. So you were 11 when you started, and now you're 31, and form some goals, figure out what to do with your life, and congrats. It's awesome. You don't have a mental illness anymore. That's what clinical psychology is. Now, that's not how they say it, but if you actually look at the literature, that is the zeitgeist that happens. This is why I love this world, which is, how are we not, as pseudo-quasi-experts of human behavior, not diving in at that exact juncture and saying, with Victor's, whether it's his app or in a real-world interaction, and say, all right, how do we now reconstruct your world knowing that this miasma that's been affecting your ability to function in life is gone? What do you want your life to be about? What are you interested in? What have you seen that you were jealous of, envious of over the course of these past 11 years that you've thought about, like, oh, I wish I could do that, but too many germs, concerns about contamination, worried about what other people think. This is where, so there are boundary conditions, some severe mental illnesses, traumatic brain injuries, just low cognitive ability that you are unable to think in abstract principles will not prevent you from having goals and behaviors that are aligned with those goals, but this higher order, higher level, central organizing concept of your life of purpose, I would say that the boundary conditions are there, and it's really worth exploring to think about this. Now, here's the thing about this. Let me offer the counterweight to that. For those people that don't have a purpose, does not mean you do not have a healthy and long life. It's just not by the mechanism that I'm proposing right now. And then I would say, here's my risky hypothesis, that if you meet the boundary conditions and can form a purpose and don't, that you will actually suffer more psychologically and physically than someone that does not meet the boundary conditions and doesn't have a purpose in life. Do I have to repeat that, or did that make sense? Yeah, okay. But it's like a risky hypothesis. I would actually pre-register that hypothesis. I just have no idea how to do the research study right in this second, how to do that.
Can I interrupt? And so are you saying that you have to be able to articulate your higher order purpose to have it? Or can you actually be acting in accordance with a higher order purpose but not be able to articulate it?
Yeah, this awareness piece, I think, is a dimension. So it's not about awareness for the boundary conditions. For me, this is about having the cognitive abilities that you can think, have these metacognitions to think about, how do I fit with myself, my present self, past self, and future self, and thinking about how do I want to organize my life. So it's not the awareness piece, it's the cognitive abstract capacity.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Because the awareness piece I'll get to in a second, which I think that's a different dimension, which is we are often unaware of what motivates us to do the things we do, and does our measurement strategy allow for any of that whatsoever in terms of what we're doing? Thoughts or comments, a few of these, before I kind of dive deeper into other areas of the conceptual piece of purpose?
I just want to voice some agreement with a couple of things you said. I agree about the choice about religiosity versus spirituality for the reason that you said. And I think boundary conditions, you mentioned some, but I think there are lots of others that aren't cognitive, that have to do with environmental opportunities and things like that, for reasons that so many people in the population actually do not develop purpose ever. Although I would say, and this is a longer statement, but maybe you and I can get into a conversation about this. I think it's true that for a lot of reasons, some people have not developed the capacity to find a purpose or find purposes, but I hope this isn't too complex, but I think that everybody has the capacity to develop that capacity. I'll put it that way.
Yep, completely agreed. Yeah. So for me, I see this as a launching pad, right? To really think. So if we think about this, if people do not meet the boundary conditions, and I'm glad you brought this, because in psychologists we often don't think enough about environmental factors. I mean, we just that's in some ways sociology, social workers we need to have these interdisciplinary conversations about this. We just don't think this way. But yeah, when you think of the boundary conditions, we shouldn't think of it as this is the stopgap now for purpose for this person. It's okay, what are the workarounds to get around that? And that's, to me it's interesting. When I had reviewers read this 2009 article, people had we were talking about this, Anthony, Patrick, and I. This got rejected by American psychologists. So one reviewer didn't like some of our hypothetical examples. Another one just went 8 on this, which is just, you're saying that someone can't have a purpose. And we're saying no. What we're saying is, as a conceptual model, you must think differently about your interventions and about the concept of an individual if they don't meet boundary conditions that we know from large bodies of literature would impair your ability to make abstract cognitive processes for doing it that way. And so I completely agree with you. Thank you for the aspirational ending to that.
So why does path 4 why is that a dotted path? And also, why doesn't it go to the between purpose and goals?
So in terms of your goals, right? So think of this as think of a pyramid where it doesn't matter what you put it as. Values are the abstract principles of your life, right? And there was a lot of talks yesterday that actually detailed what some of those might be. Just think of Schwartz, right? Stimulation, universalism, hedonism, self-direction, abstract principles. A little bit more concrete and objective, you can form these goals that happen there. And then at the most objective you have at the top of the pyramid would be the behaviors. So in terms of the resilience, it's really about the behaviors, because you can sit at home on your couch while you're watching Netflix and just space out and think about your goals. But the real action for purpose is, do you engage in behaviors that are aligned with the goals that are linked up with your purpose? So for the resilience piece for me, it's really the action is with the behaviors but not the goals themselves, which is why the pathway is over there. And then the dotted pathway is, this is just pointing out that to me, this moderation effect is the operationalization of resilience.
But isn't the dot suggest that there's sort of lack of attention, missing data out there?
Can you just flush it out for me?
Well, to me, I think Bill's remark about environmental constraints is extremely important, being a sociologist. And so I wonder if those environmental conditions, I'm sorry to think now, if there's actually enough data out there to make that a solid line between purpose and behavior consistency. But I wonder if you're suggesting to us that that's a place to start doing your research.
Oh no, the negligible line is that that these environmental conditions will have less of an import on people with a sense of purpose in life being consistent in their behaviors or engaging in repetitive behaviors that are link up with their purpose. They'll show more resilience to it. So it's that's the dotted line. I'm not using it in instructional equation modeling form.
Okay, that's confusing. That's confusing to a sociologist. A sociologist doesn't know what you're talking about. It's across disciplinary.
Well, so ignore this figure completely, and just the idea that if you have a purpose in life, when confronted with stressors, so stressors being actual life events or environmental conditions, you are more likely to seek alternative means and routes around those obstacles, recruiting social support systems that will help you get around those obstacles, finding proxies such that there will be consistency in your behavior, that if I had random sampling of your behavior over the course of a week, I could say, oh, I can deconstruct that and say, your purpose must be something to do with your family, but I don't know exactly what it is. Can you describe it for me? And then perhaps you might be able to articulate it, perhaps you might not to. That they're going to, those obstructions are going to have less of an impact on the behavioral engagement of people with a purpose compared to people that don't have a purpose.
If I can further suggest, and I think Rich would back this up, because he's the one that influenced me to think this way, and some of Brandstadter's work as well, that we are, from developmental theory, we are active agents in choices we make about the environments we choose, the people with whom we choose to interact. And in those ways, purpose could actually directly influence environmental conditions as well. And so you may want to think about at least a dotted arrow from purpose to environmental conditions.
I actually have an overhead on this during my talk.
Wonderful. And I'll step back from it, but please keep that in mind.
Oh, I totally
Rich is-
agree.
Yeah.
I was trying to reduce them.
Lines, but I completely agree. Absolutely, yeah, no question about that.
Can I throw, and this is just a connection because you asked for connections to these particular items, and I'm not sure if this relates or not, but in our data with the 8th and 9th grade with the young students, we did actually, what I didn't show in looking at the different well-being variables is actually among the different correlations between purpose, pro-social purpose, and well-being variables that we saw, there actually was either no correlation or opposite direction correlations with things like perceived stress and negative affect, which is a kind of a hypothesis I'm working with now in terms of school being the environmental condition that's not supporting kids who are focused on or finding or concerned about purpose.
That's this path right here, right?
Right, and so we do actually have those.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And
Yeah.
something I want to continue working on.
No, it's great. Yeah, so this is just a roadmap. So what I'm doing is, instead of presenting my own research, just giving. So this is great. Yeah, I mean, I love hearing kind of all these things. I mean, what I'd love to do is, after this conference, put all these things together and have the upgrade of like, here is kind of the continuing evidence, and here are kind of the alternative paths that were not in the original model based on theory and research from other disciplines and what's popped out there. 10 minutes. That's the danger of having an interactive conversation. All right, so let me just hit one thing. So just in case you spaced out during that entire thing, I was just going to kind of detail kind of 4 of the essential elements if you don't like graphical form and you somehow like bullet points. The idea is these are essential elements of purpose, that you are consistent in your behavior. If you took a random sampling, there are sociometry devices such that you can actually have cameras that take pictures every 30 seconds of your life to actually get random samplings of what your life looks like. At Pat's department, you have the electronic activating recorder, the ear. Is that the proper? So the idea that it takes random audio samplings of your environment, and the idea is that it's not obtrusive after the first day, and then you can basically collect this data and see to what degree are you living a life consistent with your purpose to get behavioral consistency. It's repetitive. If you're engaging a lot of avoidance behaviors, it just does not fit with our conceptual model of how purpose operates there. Now, some elements of purpose is efficient resource allocation means that you have to make choices, but the choices is about pursuing something as opposed to I'm going to try to avoid other things in general for your purpose. And just this conversation came up a couple nights ago out in the lobby about can people have multiple purposes? And I think the best way of thinking about this is I think there's an asymptote very quickly in terms of the number of purposes that you can have. But you think of this work and family. Many of you, if we dissected your careers, would find in work you have some level of purpose life that you can articulate if you thought about it carefully. And then if you have romantic partners or children or grandchildren, you might have a purpose there as well. Now here's the thing though. Efficient resource allocation takes a hit. Stress, I'm hypothesizing, these are hypotheses, testable, takes a hit. So that you will get the psychological benefits, but you'll experience more stress because these are very difficult decision rules. Do I stick around afterwards to focus on my book as I'm in flow writing and work, knowing that, but I'd miss my storytelling for my kid before they go to sleep, and it's such a meaningful, profound part of my life, and a goal that's aligned with my purpose of being fully engaged and present and compassionate and involved in my kids' lives. Those decision rules become much more emotionally charged if you have multiple purposes. So the hypothesis is, if you have multiple purposes, you would get psychological benefits, but you would actually suffer physically as a function of having to make these difficult decision rules. In the name of 10 minutes, I'm going to skip this. I do want to hit this because this came up with the nice red-faced altercation between Rich and Victor kind of on the first day. Was the idea of designated purposes is good and bad. I basically feel that this is the wrong question to ask. There's no empirical question about kind of is it a good or bad. Here's the testable hypothesis. My belief is that purposes that run counter to social values in your prevailing culture that you identify an attachment to become more intermediate goals aligned with that purpose become more and more difficult as you run against the predominant social values. So such that if your purpose is quote unquote bad or malevolent or challenges in a bad way the dominant social values, golden mean, reciprocity that happens there, that social forces will thwart your progress and will require extensive effort that does not have a good ratio of effort to progress that happens there. That's the testable hypothesis, as opposed to an argument of can people in ISIS or people that have any kind of delinquent purposes, do they counter or not? This is a testable question that happens there. You got to give me some time for measurement because this is kind of all right. So great studies. This has been just an amazing couple of years of just every time we go in Google Scholar and putting purpose in life in quotes and seeing kind of what pops up. And this is a lot of you guys here. Patrick's stuff has been really amazing. Carol's stuff has been instrumental. Characters, I don't even know who these people are, but this amazing work. But I do want to actually read the items of these measures, just to I just gave you the conceptual model because I am a stickler about precision as a scientist. And I should make the note of we're all building on the shoulders of each other as we produce this body of work. So here are some of the items for these studies and other kind of these large studies. My life has a clear sense of purpose. So just the word clear in front, right? Kind of just thinking about why that's there. I've discovered a satisfying life purpose, as if like a life purpose is not sufficient, but is it satisfying the life purpose, right? So now you're building, so now satisfaction can't be an outcome because it would be perfectly confounded with the independent variable in terms of purpose in life. My daily activities often seem trivial and unimportant to me. Well, now we're getting to, is it goals or is it purpose? Some people wander aimlessly through life, but I'm not one of them. Now we're kind of mixing conscientiousness and goals and purpose that are playing there. I sometimes feel as if I've done all there is to do in life. So these items, when we get to them, is it purpose in life? Is it a combination of meaning and purpose in life? Because the construct is so powerful, and these effects are so interesting that I asked us to take a step back for a second. And I've published many of these papers that have kind of used these measures. I've created worse items than even the ones that were mentioned there in my prior work of, are we capturing this thing called purpose in life? So let me offer some provocative ideas, stealing like an artist from other people, manipulating other people's stuff, and just kind of what we're playing. We have actually a large $500,000 grant right now to studying purpose over the course of basically over 5 years, and we're creating new measures. We've been doing this for the past year, doing a lot of pilot testing. And what was really cool to see how converging it was, the stuff that Matt and Bill and Heather that you guys are doing, that's happening there. So one thing is just to think about purpose in life. That paper in American Psychologist that was with Samantha and Laura King, what was the title again? Life is Pretty Meaningful? Life is Pretty Meaningful. All right, so if you dive into the middle of there, what they did is they did an item analysis of Carol, of your 2002 paper, which was the first one to kind of split with hedonic and eudaimonic well-being with Corey Keyes. And so they did an average item score, and what they was the average item score of that 1,300 sample was 4.8 on a 6-point scale. So just think about that for a second. The Midas sample, that was your 2008 paper, over 3,000 people in that one. The average score on the purpose in life measure was 5.4, average item score out of 6. So the question is, does that accurately reflect the way we think about the prevalence of purpose in life in, at least in the U.S., of the 325 million people in the United States, in terms of this high level of a prevalence rate? I'm going to argue that I don't think it's that high. I know some numbers came out yesterday, kind of in different samples, older samples of 10% or 30% that come in there. So let me just kind of break this down some ideas and kind of let's have like a deep conversation about measurement issues. Because I think that these deep, ultimate questions we're asking have to start with measurement. Has to be kind of measurement and then aligning it with theory that happens there. So the one thing is, to me, meaning is not purpose. I think, Bill, you described it really well yesterday. Because of time constraints, I'm not going to dive deeper into there. There's a disconnect between some of these theories and the methods that we're using. How we define curiosity, these conceptual models, whether you agree with all the pathways, none of the pathways, some of the pathways, you have your own pathways that you've been writing down and drawing while I've been up here. Does your measurement approach match the conceptual model? That's going to be fundamentally important. Here are the challenges. Purpose in life is a socially desirable trait. People want to claim ownership of this quality and present themselves in a favorable light, whether you do it by an interview or a self-report strategy. And there are huge social norms that prevent us from saying it's not a purpose in particular life domains. Parenting. So the question that I always think about, that we are actually working with right now in my laboratory, is how do you distinguish someone who's a parent from a superficial and illusory purpose to actually having a purpose? Now, that predicates on the question, do you think every parent in the United States has their purpose in life involve something to do with their kids? I don't feel it's 100% for having it that way. I've seen parents, and I think there's something about diving deeper into this, about this question. So the three samples that really gets me to thinking about how difficult it is to measure purpose are teachers, first-line responders, and parents. So for parents, if you guys haven't seen the documentary on Netflix, I encourage you to see it. It's called Trophy Kids. It's about kids that are way too involved in their kids' sports lives. If you see these parents, ask yourself whether their purpose in life involves parenting, or if it's about them trying to live their lives with their kids, which is not parenting. That's about their own self-development and their kids being a vehicle for it happening there. You are going to see emotional, physical abuse and neglect. That's going to make you think that you're going to be the best parent humanly possible, because the bar is set pretty low from this documentary, but you're going to feel really good about yourself. You watch this and you say, okay, there are behaviors that you would expect from someone that says they're going to be engaged, they're going to be present, they're going to be compassionate. Now, we're not talking about 100% behavioral consistency, because anyone that who has seen kids or has kids know, if you do that and you don't work on your personal growth, you're going to be a bad parent from a different perspective, because you have not taken care of yourself in some capacity and developed yourself as a role model for what this should become. But when you see parents that go out of their way not to spend time with their kids regularly on a weekend, where to make sure, and I'm not talking about having the romantic escapade with your partner to be away from your kids. I'm talking on a regular basis, the idea of, I have so many interests, the last thing I want to do is go to a carnival with my kids, because I did that already when I was in my my grade school years and my high school years, and creating as much physical space with other people to be doing things, that speaks to me about kind of implicitly of, you know what, this is hard to think of, there might be a goal, but like the fundamental overarching purpose for how you construct and live your life, there are questions there. So you get back to the conceptual model, behavioral consistency, psychological flexibility, how you respond to the obstacles of that kids are little terrorists that will kind of continue fighting and arguing with you forever and will outlast you for doing these things. Your ability to deal with that. Do you disengage? Or do you work into the heart of the fire, kind of to play with that there? There are ways, how do you capture, if you ask people in a self-report questionnaire of parents, do you have a purpose in life? Now, no one's done the study before. I suspect you'll get between 90 to 100% of people saying yes. And then if you dived in and observed their behavior, especially with these non-obtrusive methods, you'll find that there's nothing behaviorally that shows a sense of purpose in life except for sporadic moments here and there. So to me, by using these real-world examples to really think about how to do this. For the police example, I don't know about you, but for me, the most delinquent kids from my high school years are the police officers in my hometown. So some people become first-line responders for really great, profound values, right? Equity, justice, protection, community development, and other people have less socially desirable values about power and dominance that involve there. Those are different, and you can see that behaviorally in terms of how people respond to ethical dilemmas, how people talk about the people that are part of their community that they're working for as first-line responders when they're not there. There are ways to doing this, and I think it's more resource intensive, it's difficult, but this concept, this construct we're interested in is worthy enough for us to dive deeper into this. And so I think about that we need to be very creative in kind of having less socially desirable methods, discrete and less obtrusive measures. So right now we are experimenting with a few things. We are doing think aloud paradigms and focus groups with first-line responders. So right now we're working with Customs and Border Protection, the government intelligence, field agents, and we're working with police officers and firefighters to figure out with peer nominations and behavioral observations who has a purpose and who doesn't. Now here's the thing, it's a descriptive study from the Solomon Asch, Paul Rosen kind of model, which is we're not going to have the answers. What we want to do is really start to kind of clarify a little bit more of what are the things that they're saying, that we're observing, that then I could bring to you all like later and say, listen, this appears to be what's relevant, to differentiate between a superficial and illusory purpose and an actual purpose that happens there. So real descriptive, basic stuff that I think we skip. We like to dive right into, is purpose in life related to mortality? Awesome questions again. I love that research, but I think we need to take a step backwards and go, okay, let's get to the basics. What is this thing? If you don't think 100% of parents and police officers have a purpose in life for what they're doing, then how do we separate those that would say yes, but they actually don't have it as a purpose? If you don't think 100% of parents and police officers have a purpose in life for what they're doing, then how do we separate those that would say yes, but they actually don't have it as a purpose? Am I out of time?
I think we're out of time.
Okay.
We need to take a break.
Okay, sorry.
Of course, and then we can cut into the integrative discussion, and you can bring up.
Yeah. I should probably say that when I give talks, I don't time any of these things. I don't practice them, so this is why I never have the time. So this is one of my twins at Dewey Beach, and there's this one, for some strange reason, there's this one picnic bench, and there's not anyone anywhere on the entire beach whatsoever. I don't even need to tell you about her love of animals and need to draw what horseshoe crabs could look like in different environments right there. She felt compelled to dive right to this table and saw some horseshoe crabs and start drawing them different ways that they could look like, and why the hell would evolution lead to horseshoe crabs the way that they look like of different environments? She's not. And I'm not a biologist, and I'm not teaching her evolutionary biology at 9 years old. How do you explain, right, in the concept of everyday life, the idea of this almost like compulsion the self-organizing principle, this compulsion to get in there and have to draw these horseshoe crabs right then and there, as we just drove 3.5 hours to get to the beach where there's picnic benches anywhere near us, of that piece, that element there of like that behavioral consistency, and then the willingness to break from our tribe, just to kind of like and go solo if we're doing this way. And just as another example is Seth Godin. I don't know if you're a big fan of his, but I am. He's like a marketing genius. He likes to talk about this example when he vacations. He writes a blog post every single day of his life. I don't know if any of you subscribe like myself. Some of them are horrible because he's writing one every single day. But when he goes on vacations, people always give him flack. And he'll be like a Pan-Pacific island, and he'll be at this beautiful ocean around him, and he'll be on his laptop, and people will be like, look at him like, dude, why did you come? And he's like, I love doing this. Like, this is my thing. My thing is to give people a voice to be able to explain themselves and what they want to do in the most effective way possible. I want to do this everywhere I go for doing it this way. That we have psychological and social barriers that prevent us from living out our purpose and understanding purpose because we don't think about this in the complexity and messiness of the real world. So my request for us when we have our discussion is, where are our risky hypotheses? Where is our skepticism about our measures to make with the goal not to destroy but to create more complex, idiographic, contextualized approaches that are difficult as handing a questionnaire or putting on a Qualtrics, but can capture this thing, this deep, higher order, self-organizing construct that it captures the totality of a person. That has such relevance to health and well-being. How can we do this in a way that's more effective? And I'm looking forward to the conversation and kind of pushing the conversation forward. Thank you.